While mainstream media has tried to put their claws into more and more influencer-related news topics, it is obvious from recent articles by Vanity Fair and Cosmopolitan that people outside of the sphere of the internet just don't really grasp the unfolding situations that they're trying to report on. And that, in my opinion, is dangerous. Hey there, I'm here to interrupt your regularly scheduled entertainment. Colleen Ballinger and James Charles are not the first influencers that have had more mainstream articles written about them, and with the ever-growing reach of influencers in our lives, they definitely will not be the last. Both of these creators have had a slew of pretty damning controversy following them around. While Colleen's allegations are a bit more recent in the spotlight, that doesn't negate the severity of the allegations lobbied against James Charles in the not-too-distant past. And honestly, James Charles stuff was not really being talked about a whole lot anymore, so I'm kind of surprised that he even agreed to do, the interview for his article, because boy oh boy, is that fucking backfiring for him now. Both of these creators have been interviewed recently, James through Cosmopolitan and Colleen through Vanity Fair, and both the articles written have been labeled off as puff pieces by the collective internet. There are dozens of videos out there at this point detailing the articles and reactions to them, and as such, I'm not going to read them word for the 100th time. Most people who are not die-hard fans of either of these people have come to very similar conclusions, that these articles suck, and the writers overall should feel pretty ashamed. While both writers had claims of being journalists to some degree, which I'll get into that later, most people well versed in the topics covered in these articles will widely agree that the writers did not do their due diligence with any kind of research for the articles, or at the very least, definitely not enough research. The issues with both these articles is that they rely too heavily on the word of the accused and not enough on the recountment of the physical video or photo proof of the allegations, nor did they rely on the testimony of the people affected by James and Colleen's behavior, which might be because of legal issues, because their allegations are not proven in court, yada yada, but I digress. While the James article did touch a bit more with kind of an attempt to reach out to a victim for a statement, or at least they claimed to have asked for a statement from some unknown accuser, that statement was not acquired and thus not included, which leads me to doubt this, legitimacy of them actually reaching out to anybody, considering there were so many people accusing James of stuff, but again, I digress. The article about Colleen did not reach out to victims at all, according to Adam McIntyre, who was the only person actually named within the Vanity Fair article. Also to note that Colleen's article was just so heavily pre-approved by her lawyer, it was almost like he wrote it himself. Now let me get into why these kind of articles are dangerous, since that's the claim I made for my opening statement. Well, I think it's a little shitty to say, but there is truth in saying it, that major publications like Vanity Fair and Cosmopolitan have turned into more content farm-like sites than real journalism. In the age of the internet, with, algorithms and SEO driving site traffic and clicks earning money, it's no surprise that sites like the two before mentioned ones tend to push out articles quickly and hire a lot of freelancers to write for them, which is getting back into them claiming to be journalists or whatever. You don't actually need any sort of degree or anything like that to write an article for these sites, which I would know because I don't have a writing degree, but I've written articles for sites before, so there's that. I also believe that journalist is something more of a self-proclaimed kind of title that you can just give yourself, but again, I digress. It's kind of an opinion of mine. But basically getting at that, Vanity Fair and Cosmopolitan, due to, the internet, are now having to push out more and more content in order to stay relevant. The speed in which these articles related to trending topics need to be written at could also explain why there's this so minimal, detailed information on the allegations and provably incorrect information within the articles. In the Colleen article, as an example, I believe that the writer either didn't have time to do extensive research or just opted not to, as it was obvious from said article that they were wholly unfamiliar with the allegations against Colleen prior to writing. And like I said, with the speed in which trending topics need to be written about, it's possible that this article was written days prior and was just sitting around in the queue to be published. Both of these articles basically just touched on a bulleted list of what the accusations were, in probably the vaguest way they possibly could, and had James and Colleen both go, "Nuh-uh," despite the video, audio, and text proof of the contradictions. I briefly worked for one of these mini article sites that you kind of see pushed around, and from the back-end knowledge I'd gained from that work, I know that many of these sites unfortunately kind of run on a pretty similar pattern. Due to the volume of articles being pushed out daily on these sites, specifically to garner as many clicks as possible, usually the articles will be very briefly reviewed to ensure just as little grammar mistakes as possible, given a glance can give. And they tend to push right on through. These articles also tend to be scheduled and sit for a day or two, like I mentioned before, and that really depends on how trending the topic is. And the more trending the topic, the quicker the article is pushed out. However, that also means that there's a lot more room for mistakes in these articles. Editors, if you really want to call them that, do not fact-check the work submitted for review, and as long as the work isn't going to incite harm to someone else, if they even notice that to begin with, they just tend to think that the writer knows what they're talking about and, pass it off. I can't tell you how many articles I read while working for the site that I did articles for and was like, that's wrong. But that shit was about cartoons and comic books, so having a character's name wrong or the timeline of an episode incorrect wasn't really the end of the world. However, with things like interviewing influencers who have child grooming accusations lobbied against them, the fact that the writers did not fact check or just didn't care to go against the word of these influencers is pretty dangerous. This gives the influencer the ability to tell whatever story they please and not have those ideas questioned or challenged, leading to the readers also not challenging or questioning them. After all, if they were wrong, wouldn't the interviewer say so? Or anybody? Additionally, it is noted in the Colleen article that one of the hyperlinks embedded within the article, when referencing what grooming is, it takes the reader to a new article about Epstein and Maxwell. Many people who have not wrote for these sites are understandably confused and probably pretty pissed off that this hyperlink did not in fact actually go to a resource for learning about grooming. And the reason for this is shitty and of course fueled by capitalism. In these content farm article sites, one of the things we were taught to do was to embed these hyperlinks, at least one every paragraph or so for the site that I worked for, to drive traffic to other articles or affiliated companies, because again, repeating, more clicks means more money. The site that I worked for specifically said that the article you linked to did not directly have to relate to the article you were writing, just that the words that you used to link those two articles together had to have some kind of similarity. So, as an example, if I wrote an article that the main character of this show was interesting, I would then hyperlink an article about interesting main characters in that sentence, even if the character I was writing about was not in that new article. Since Epstein and Maxwell were very well known for their grooming and pedophilia, the Colleen article referencing grooming was all the connection they needed in order to link that different article about grooming. Now, I can't speak for Vanity Fair or even Cosmopolitan, but the site that I worked for generally didn't want you to link to any articles older than 3 months old, but I think that's more specific company to company and not something that's a hard set rule, but I would, wager I guess that they probably also want something a little more trendy to link back to. Again, I'm just giving my insight based upon the website that I did work for and is not 100% for sure what every single site does, but just looking at these two articles, the formatting is very similar, so again, I imagine practices are very similar enough from site to site. Due to the nature of these sites being more content farm-like deals, like I continue to mention, it means that thousands, if not millions of people click through these articles on these sites, and their ads further promote them off-site as well. That brings the eyes of many people who are unfamiliar with influencers, the victims, the allegations, and simply have them read, "These kids are lying for attention," and just believe it. And because, as we know from hundreds of other situations, people like to get their information from as little sources as possible, and most will not look further into a situation. I mean, that's kind of why all these fucking weirdos think that ivermectin cured COVID. It's this propensity for the average Joe not to look more in depth with the topic that makes these kind of articles dangerous. Leading thousands or millions of people just to shrug off allegations of abuse is just a tactic to help the careers of these influencers. Hence why the James Charles article really nosedived into a fluffy ad for his makeup line, despite the alarmingly, woe is me direction the article took about James being unable to find a boyfriend his own age because gay men in their 20s just vanished from the world apparently. Both of these articles make Colleen and James out to be the victims of the fabled cancel culture, villains of the week. and targets of an internet mob who will forget they exist as soon as someone else fucks up. But blaming cancel culture for people being upset about your actions just bolsters victim-blaming narratives. They are not the victims of targeted hate campaigns. They are not being harassed using fabricated evidence. The videos exist. The screenshots exist. Their own words and actions have led them to this point, and they need to stop pretending we didn't see or hear them. And with that, I'm going to leave the video off here, because if I go any more deep diving nonsense, we are all going to be pretty frustrated in the end of things. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. That would help me out a lot. If you want to have any sort of discourse or discussion in the comments, feel free to. This video, like all of my content, is brought to you by Patreon, so thank you so much to Ippo, Rome, and Ashley for subscribing. If you want to support me on Patreon, tiers start as little as $1 a month. And with that, this is Minji signing off. Until next time.
I can't move on till I let go. I feel so lost, never at home. Need to be strong, every breath hold. 'Cause I can't move on till I let go.